He's currently a professor of American Studies at the Université Paris-Ouest, Nanterre, in Nanterre, France. And the lecture topic that he's chosen today, I think, fits in very nicely with the lectures that we've just heard earlier this morning. Obama's Foreign Policy, the Case of the Middle East. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm welcome for Professor Pierre Guerlain. Thank you.
Actually, I didn't know I would have 15 minutes, so I have a paper which is too long. I'll try to shorten it. But I'm going to, and also I didn't know that John Pfeffer would be here. In the written version, I quote him in the paper. So it's a good coincidence. Let me start with a remark coming from an unlikely quota. Noam Chomsky, the well-known dissident or critic of US foreign policy, very often repeats that the US is the freest country in the world. And I agree with him. Freest means the country in which access to information is easiest. Now, after saying this, I'm going to be critical of the US. Actually, I would like to deconstruct the title of this presentation, Obama's Foreign Policy. Because when you talk about foreign policy, it's common to say Bush's foreign policy, or Truman's foreign policy, or Kennedy's foreign policy, as if foreign policy were made only by the president. But anyone who studies foreign policy, of course, knows that many actors. So it's just a shorthand, semantic shorthand to say Obama's foreign policy. Which I'm going to use from time to time to make things easier. And I want to study what I call Obama's rhetorical journey from his Cairo speech to his kill list of potential assassinations. My first point is Obama the speechmaker versus Obama the chief executive officer. So in 2009, when he went to Egypt, he said, I have come here to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world. One based upon mutual interest and mutual respect. One based upon the truth that America and Islam are not exclusive and need not be in competition. Instead, they overlap and share common principles. Principles of justice and progress, tolerance, and the dignity of all human beings. About the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, he expressed his support for Israel and his condemnation of Holocaust deniers just before his visit to Buchenwald the next day, and he added, the United States do not accept the legitimacy of continued Israeli settlements. This construction violates previous agreements and undermines efforts to achieve peace. It is time for these settlements to stop. About Iran, he opposed the development of the nuclear bomb, of course, and he affirmed his desire to work through diplomatic channels. I will skip the quotation. In this speech, which was considered justifiably as an olive branch to the Muslim world, Obama announced his intentions and presented a philosophy or Weltanschauung, which corresponded to previous statements he'd made before he became president. Then, in 2011, at the General Assembly of the UN, Obama repeated his belief in the two-state solution, yet he blocked the Palestinian initiative to become a full member of the UN. And his opposition to the building of new settlements had been apparently successfully countered by the Israeli Prime Minister and his allies in the US. In September 2012, Palestine figured only in one paragraph at the UN and had almost disappeared from Obama's preoccupations. In the debate Obama and Romney had on foreign policy, or supposedly on foreign policy, Iran was quoted 45 times, Israel 34, Palestine not mentioned, and also Europe not mentioned, except for Greece in the case of Romney. Now, Walter Russell Mead argues justifiably that ever since 1948, Americans have shown more sympathy for the Israelis than for the Arabs. I have a quotation here which I'm going to skip. So this is the context in which Obama has to work. In his book entitled The Crisis of Zionism, Peter Beinart tells the story of how Obama came to abandon his insistence on the end of settlements and how in May 2011, Obama and Netanyahu got involved in what the Israeli leader called a diplomatic war over a mention of the 1967 borders by Obama in a speech delivered at AIPAC. And this is what Beinart concludes. The May 2011 clash over the 1967 lines proved to be the last time President Obama publicly articulated the liberal Zionism he had learned in Chicago. After that, he effectively adopted Netanyahu's monist Zionism as his own. Let me shorten. There are two ways to explain this change of view or this change of attitude as far as Obama is concerned. One way is to argue that Obama is a weak president and that he bowed to pressure from the Israeli prime minister. Obama, in that case, caves in whenever he faces determined opposition, whether from Republicans in Congress or from the Israeli prime minister. The second approach is to argue that Obama's position is determined by a set of institutional factors and the relationship between the powers that determine American foreign policy. This is why I come to my second point, actors and factors in the formulation of US foreign policy in the Middle East. Congress is not very popular in America. Only 11% of Americans actually approve of what Congress is doing. Yet, for some issues, Congress plays a major role in the shaping of foreign policy. For example, the pro-Israel lobby, which should not be called the Jewish lobby, as Chuck Hagel probably knows by now, includes not only AIPAC, but Christian fundamentalists. The largest numbers, of course, are Christian fundamentalists, large segments of the military-industrial complex, and according to Ilan Pape, even big oil. When these sources of power, as far as the Middle East are concerned, are aligned, then they shape US foreign policy without any problem. There was no major opposition to assassinating bin Laden, although maybe from a legal point of view it was not quite kosher. Some legal scholars have argued that it was illegal to kill bin Laden in international law and in American law. But clearly, no major sector of American foreign policy opposed the assassination of bin Laden, so it was easy for Obama to do it. Also productive in terms of electoral prospects and so on. But then there are cases in which this quartet, as Ilan Pape calls the pro-Israel lobby, is torn by tensions. And therefore, foreign policy is harder to determine. For example, as far as Iran is concerned, clearly the US military does not want a full-scale war with Iran. General Dempsey even said that the US didn't want to be complicit in a war. So because the US military is opposed to a war with Iran, it gives the President Obama more power in his relationship with the Israeli Prime Minister. And it seems, we're not sure about it, that Netanyahu wanted war with Iran. But we're not totally sure. It might have been a ploy. And the American military did not want a war. In the end, in this fight between Israel and the US won. This is another area in which psychologizing is not productive. If you consider that Netanyahu is an alpha male and Obama a weak president, it's all wrong. Some Israelis argue that Netanyahu is not an alpha male at all, that in fact is dominated by his wife. So psychology is not very helpful there. What is sure is that the US and Israel agree about, yes, 5 minutes, okay, agree about continuing the war which is happening at a low level intensity against Iran, that is, using MEK, the terrorist group, in order to attack institutions in Iran, targeting scientists to assassinate them, resorting to the Stuxnet virus. So there is agreement there between Israel, but also the major foreign policy shapers in the United States. There are cases in which there is conflict, for example, over Libya. On the one hand, you had two allies of the US, France and Britain, for their own very dubious reasons, especially in the case of France, pushing for war. And then three of his advisors, Clinton, Rice, and Slaughter, wanted war, whereas the Defense Secretary, Gates, said that anyone wanting an intervention ought to have his head examined. Clearly, no one's head was examined, and the war was supported by the United States. So it's a clear case in which there's opposition, and then one side wins. In this particular case, although, as you can guess, I'm no fan of Bush, and therefore as Defense Secretary, Gates was right, because the intervention in Libya just did not liberate the suffering population from a dictator, but created another form of chaos. That is why, in order to go very quickly, one cannot determine what is the foreign policy of a president without analyzing which forces push him in one direction or the other. In the case of the US and Israel, it's not true that Israel is the tail that wags the dog. It's a complex web of power forces, and there's a resultant of these power forces. I think I'm going to stop here because I'm limited to 15 minutes. Thank you.